The reflection in his $1 million supercar's mirror showed flashing lights. A cop's voice, dripping with suspicion, shattered the calm. "This car doesn't fit the neighborhood. Or you. Step out. Now." The confrontation had already begun. The quiet hum of the Koenigsegg Gemera's electric motor was the only sound Julian Vance had been enjoying. It was a sound he designed, a whisper of power that was the polar opposite of the roaring V8s that usually prowled the sun-drenched, palm-lined expanse of Worth Avenue. In Palm Beach, wealth was old, loud, and ostentatious. Julian's was new, silent, and self-made. The car, a 4-seat Hyper GT that was more spaceship than automobile, was painted in a custom shade called solar flare, shifting from deep bronze to fiery gold under the brilliant Florida sun. It was the only one of its kind in the world. And, at this moment, it was attracting the wrong kind of attention. He placed the car in park, the transmission engaging with a soft, decisive click he'd spent 3 months perfecting. Through his open window, the salty air, thick with the scent of hibiscus and old money, was cut by the acrid smell of exhaust from the approaching police cruiser. Julian, a 45-year-old man whose calm demeanor was his most valuable asset, felt a familiar weariness settle over him. He called it the script. It was a play he'd been forced to watch and act in his entire life. He knew the lines. He knew the blocking. He just never knew how the final act would end. The officer who appeared at his window fit the casting call perfectly. He was in his late 40s, his face weathered and ruddy from the sun, his eyes hidden behind reflective aviator sunglasses. A slight tick in his jaw betrayed a deep-seated impatience. His uniform was stretched taut over a frame that had seen better days. This was Officer Miller. "License and registration," Miller said, the words clipped. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at the car, his gaze crawling over the seamless carbon fiber bodywork and the Alcantara-lined interior as if it were an alien artifact. Julian reached slowly, deliberately, into the glove compartment. Every movement was calculated. In these moments, sudden gestures could be misinterpreted as threats. He produced a leather folio containing the temporary registration, still warm from the dealership's printer. "Just picked it up," Julian said, his voice even. He was dressed in a simple, charcoal gray Loro Piana cashmere polo and tailored linen trousers. No logos, no flash. His quiet luxury was a language Miller clearly didn't speak, or chose not to understand. Miller took the folio, his thumb smudging the crisp paper. "This is a lot of car, sir." The "sir" was a formality, stripped of all respect. "You live around here?" "I have a residence nearby, yes," Julian replied. A small crowd was beginning to form. A jogger slowed his pace, his phone held up, discreetly recording. A couple at an outdoor cafe turned in their seats, their whispered conversation shielded behind their hands. The script always required an audience. They were here to witness the performance, to validate the officer's suspicion. Miller handed the papers back, his eyes finally meeting Julian's. They were cold, devoid of curiosity, filled only with judgment. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, please." Julian held the officer's gaze for a long moment. He could have ended it right there. One phone call. One name drop. But the script demanded he play his part. So he nodded, unbuckled his seatbelt, and pushed open the dihedral synchrohelix door. It swung up and out in a silent, graceful arc, a piece of engineering poetry. As his Tom Ford driving shoes met the hot pavement, Julian knew the first act was over. And the second was about to be far, far worse. As Julian stood, Officer Miller took a deliberate step back, creating a stage on the sun-bleached asphalt. He waved over his radio, and within a minute, a second patrol car arrived. A younger officer, whose name tag read Reed, stepped out. He looked from the Koenigsegg to Julian, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes before he saw Miller's hardened expression and fell into line. His presence changed the dynamic, transforming it from a traffic stop into a full-blown investigation. "Sir, we've had reports of a vehicle matching this description being driven erratically," Miller lied, his voice now projecting for the benefit of the growing audience. "I've been driving for less than 10 minutes, at the speed limit," Julian stated, his voice remaining a low, steady anchor in the rising tide of tension. Miller ignored him. He began to circle the car, running a gloved hand over the flawless solar flare paint. "These things are easy to hotwire, if you know what you're doing. We get professionals coming down from Miami all the time." He then looked directly at Julian, a smirk playing on his lips. "Let me guess, lottery winner. Or is this music video money?" The insult, so lazy and stereotypical, landed in the quiet air like a thrown rock. The jogger's phone was now held high and steady. The couple from the cafe was openly staring. Julian felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, a rage he'd learned to transmute into fuel. He thought of his father, a brilliant architect who was once handcuffed on his own construction site because a neighbor thought he'd looked out of place. "Stay calm, son," his father's voice echoed in his memory. "Their anger is a cage. Don't walk into it." "I have the bill of sale right here," Julian said, gesturing toward the folio still in his hand. Miller snatched it from him. He opened it and stared at the name on the title document. He read it aloud, drawing out each syllable with mocking disbelief. "Julian Vance." He looked up. "That's you?" "That's me," Julian confirmed. "All right, Mr. Vance," Miller said, folding the papers and shoving them into his own pocket. "For my safety and yours, I'm going to have to pat you down. Turn around, hands on the hood of the car." This was the part of the script designed for maximum degradation. Julian complied, placing his palms flat on the warm carbon fiber. The material, which his own company had developed a patent for, felt alien under his touch in this context. Miller's hands were rough. He yanked up the back of the expensive cashmere polo, exposing the skin of Julian's back to the humid air. He ran his hands down Julian's sides, patting his pockets with unnecessary force. He pulled out Julian's wallet and his phone, tossing them onto the hood with a clatter that made Julian's jaw tighten. The wallet, a bespoke piece of alligator leather, fell open, revealing a black, metallic card. "What's this?" Miller grunted, picking up the heavy card. "It's my identification," Julian said. Miller glanced at it, saw the name, and tossed it back down. "Stay still." The pat-down continued, a slow, deliberate performance of dominance. Each touch was an assertion of power, a physical reminder of who was in control. Officer Reed stood by, his arms crossed, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Finished, Miller stepped back. "Okay, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "At this time, you are being detained on suspicion of grand theft auto." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The accusation was now official. The humiliation was complete. Julian closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, centering himself. The cage was set. He would not walk into it. He would dismantle it. Just as Officer Miller motioned for Reed to get the handcuffs, a new voice cut through the tense air. "Stop. What are you doing?" The voice was young, clear, and trembling with a mixture of fear and indignation. Everyone turned. A woman in her early 20s, wearing the polo shirt of the Koenigsegg dealership, was pushing her way through the small crowd. A red intern name tag that read Chloe swung from her neck. She was the one who had handled his final paperwork. Miller's head snapped towards her. "This is official police business, miss. Stay back." "Business? That's Julian Vance. He just bought the car," Chloe said, her voice gaining strength. "I personally handed him the keys 20 minutes ago. His ID, his credit, everything is legitimate." Miller's eyes narrowed. He looked down at the young woman, a dismissive sneer forming on his face. "Go back to making coffee, sweetheart. The adults are talking." Chloe's face flushed with anger. I'm not a barista, I'm an automotive engineering intern. I know who he is because I've studied his work on hybrid powertrain patents. He's a genius. And you're harassing him." A murmur swept through the crowd. The tech vlogger who had been filming zoomed in on Chloe, then back to Miller. The narrative was shifting. This was no longer just a cop and a suspect, it was a cop, a suspect, and a credible witness. The power dynamic tilted, just slightly. From the dealership, a man in a tailored but sweat-stained suit came rushing out, his face pale with panic. It was the manager, Mr. Peterson. "Officers, officers. What seems to be the problem?" he asked, out of breath. He was looking at Miller, but his panicked eyes kept flicking towards Julian, a man caught between his fear of the police and his terror of the consequences of this disaster. "This man is being detained," Miller began. "He's Mr. Vance." Peterson squeaked, his voice an octave too high. "He's a VIP client. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Miller, now being challenged from two directions, felt his authority slipping. The crowd was watching, their phones like 100 unblinking eyes. He was losing control of the script. In a desperate, angry move to reassert his dominance, he took a step forward, pointed at the documents Julian had placed on the hood, and did something irreversible. He swiped them off the car. The papers scattered across the pavement. Then, with a vicious kick, he sent the main title document skittering across the sidewalk until it landed directly in a puddle formed by a lawn sprinkler. The ink on the freshly printed page began to bleed instantly. "There is no misunderstanding," Miller snarled, his face now a mask of pure fury. "This vehicle is evidence in a potential crime. And right now, your VIP client is my suspect." The deliberate act of destruction sucked the air out of the scene. It was a line crossed. It was no longer about suspicion, it was about malice. Julian watched the ink of his own name dissolve in the dirty water. He slowly lifted his head, and the practiced calm in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something as cold, hard, and brilliant as a diamond. The air crackled with a new kind of silence. The crowd was no longer just watching a drama, they were holding their breath, waiting for the explosion. But Julian Vance didn't explode. He didn't raise his voice. He simply moved with a newfound, chilling precision. He turned his gaze from the ruined document on the ground to Officer Miller. "You've made a grave error," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a judge's gavel. Miller scoffed, though a flicker of doubt now touched his eyes. "You're the one in a world of trouble, pal." "Am I?" Julian asked. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket, and for a second, Officer Reed tensed. But Julian's hand emerged holding not a weapon, but a slim, black case. He opened it and produced a single card. It wasn't paper. It was a solid piece of matte black titanium, cool and heavy. He placed it gently on the car's hood, the soft clink of metal on carbon fiber echoing in the hush. "What the hell is that?" Miller grunted, peering down at the laser-etched silver lettering. Julian looked him straight in the eye. "That is my name." Miller picked it up. The card's unexpected weight seemed to surprise him. His eyes scanned the text. Julian Vance. Founder and Chief Innovation Officer. Vance Automotive Group. His mouth fell slightly open. He looked from the card to Julian's face, then back to the car. The name. Vance Automotive Group. It was the world's leading innovator in electric and hybrid performance technology. They supplied components to half the brands in Formula One and held patents that were the bedrock of the entire EV industry. The tech vlogger filming the scene suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with excitement. "Oh my God! You're the Julian Vance. The guy from the cover of Wired magazine. The VAG patents. Vance Automotive Group. Holy crap." He spun his phone around to face him. "Guys, you are not going to believe this. This isn't just a rich guy, This is the man who invents rich guy cars. The information spread through the crowd like a shockwave. Vance Automotive Group. Julian's voice cut through the rising chatter, each word a perfectly calibrated projectile. You are standing in front of the Koenigsegg Gemera, engine serial number 001. It is the final prototype. Its hybrid powertrain, which I personally designed, is running on software that hasn't even been released to the public. He took a step closer, his presence seeming to grow. You just kicked the patent application documents for its battery cooling system into a puddle. The door you're leaning against is constructed using VAG patent number 113 for braided carbon fiber composites. He pointed to the elegant VAG monogram on the car's wheel hubs. I imagine you can guess what that stands for. The color began to drain from Miller's face. He was drowning, and Julian wasn't throwing him a life raft. He was handing him an anchor. This could be fake, Miller stammered, holding up the titanium card as if it were burning his hand. Julian almost smiled. By all means, officer. Call your dispatcher. Have them run a background check on Julian Vance, founder of Vance Automotive Group. Or better yet, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, call your police chief. He and I were supposed to have lunch last week to discuss his department's new vehicle fleet. We can reschedule. Before Officer Miller could process the threat, a sleek, black Audi e-tron, a car whose electric drivetrain, ironically, used 3 of VAG's core patents, pulled up silently behind the patrol cars. The passenger door opened, and a woman in a sharply tailored business suit stepped out. This was not a cop. This was Councilwoman Maria Flores, the head of the city council, and she looked furious. Julian had not called the police chief. He had called her. Directly. The bypass of the chain of command was a power move of breathtaking audacity. Julian. What in God's name is happening? Flores demanded, her sharp eyes taking in the scene, the scattered, wet papers, the 2 stunned officers, and Julian standing by his hypercar as if he were holding a board meeting. Maria, thank you for coming, Julian said calmly. I was just being educated by Officer Miller on the subtle nuances of Palm Beach law enforcement. Chief O'Malley, a portly man with a perpetually worried expression, arrived moments later, having clearly been summoned by a panicked Flores. He saw the councilwoman, he saw Julian, and his face, already florid, seemed to collapse inward. He knew this was not a traffic stop. This was a political firestorm. Mr. Vance. Councilwoman, he began, trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. I'm sure we can clear this up. I'm sure we can, Julian agreed. He took out his phone, a custom-built device of his own design. He tapped the screen a few times, and a holographic schematic of the city's infrastructure briefly flickered above it. Chief, as you know, Vance Automotive Group is currently rolling out the new Vance Public Safety Initiative for Palm Beach. Next-generation communication, data analysis, threat prediction, all running on our servers. He looked up from the phone, his eyes locking with O'Malley's. I've just temporarily suspended all non-emergency data synchronization between your patrol cars and the VAG cloud. A security precaution, you understand. On the laptop mount in Miller's car, the city map went gray. A red banner appeared, service paused. The visual proof of Julian's power was absolute and terrifying. O'Malley looked as if he'd been punched. Now that I have your full attention, Julian continued, here are my terms. Officer Miller will be fired. Officer Reed will be placed on administrative leave and undergo mandatory retraining in de-escalation and implicit bias. I expect their badges and service weapons on your desk by 5 o'clock. He wasn't done. Furthermore, I am requesting the City Council, led by Ms. Flores, to immediately authorize a full, independent, third-party audit of your department's practices. Until that audit is complete and its recommendations are implemented, the Public Safety Initiative contract is frozen. All funds and resources will be diverted. He paused, letting the weight of the multi-million-dollar consequence settle. Then he delivered the final, masterful stroke. He looked over at Chloe, the young intern who had stood up for him, who was watching with wide, disbelieving eyes. Those diverted funds, Julian announced, will be used as the initial endowment for a new charitable foundation. We'll call it the Chloe Grant. It will be dedicated to providing legal aid for victims of profiling and offering whistleblower protection for city employees who have the courage to speak out against injustice. He had not just demanded punishment. He had created a legacy out of his own humiliation, and in doing so, had publicly rewarded the one person who showed integrity. The crowd, which had been listening in stunned silence, finally erupted. It wasn't just cheers, it was a roar of catharsis and approval. Chief O'Malley stood silent, broken. Officer Miller simply stared at the man he had tried to humiliate, realizing he hadn't just pulled over a black man in a fancy car. He had pulled over the man who owned the system that employed him. 1 month later, the story of Julian Vance was no longer just a viral video, it was a catalyst. A quick succession of news clips told the tale: Officer Miller, stripped of his uniform, leaving an internal affairs hearing. Chief O'Malley, announcing his early retirement to a barrage of reporters' questions. Councilwoman Flores, at a press conference, formally announcing a sweeping police reform bill, funded in part by a new civic partnership. The final scene wasn't on a sun-drenched street, but in the gleaming, minimalist lobby of the Vance Automotive Group headquarters. Julian stood beside Chloe, who was no longer an intern but a full-time junior engineer in his R&D department. In front of them, on the showroom floor, sat a brand-new, all-electric VAG sedan. Julian held out a key card. "This is yours," he said simply. Chloe stared at him, speechless. I can't accept this, Mr. Vance." "You're not accepting a gift," Julian corrected her gently. "You're accepting a tool. You spoke up when it was hard. You saw a person, not a stereotype. That's the kind of engineering our society needs more than anything else." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Besides, your new position requires you to test our long-range battery performance. Consider it a company car." He looked past her, through the vast glass walls of the building he had built, to the city beyond. His final words were not for her, but for the unseen audience, for everyone who had watched his story. "True power isn't about making sure you're never challenged," he said, his voice now a calm narration over the scene. "It's about what you build in the space you clear after the challenge is over. It's not about owning the room. It's about raising the floor, so everyone can stand a little taller." As Chloe finally took the key, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude, the scene faded to black, replaced by simple text. This story is a powerful reminder of what can happen when one person stands their ground. But what do you think? Was Julian's response justified, or too much? What would you have done in that situation? Share your thoughts below, and please, comment with respect. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share it so more people can see what real accountability looks like.